A priceless 18th century map vanished from the British Museum at 3:17 a.m. by sunrise. The night porter lay dead in the reading room, throat cut with a jade-handled scalpel. And the only clue was a single drop of blood forming a perfect arrow, pointing east. Welcome to the story, my friends. Grab your tea, settle deep into your chair, and let the little gray cells wake up. If impossible crimes and Belgian mustaches are your poison, smash subscribe right now. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Your support truly means the world. And let's follow Hercule Poirot into the shadows. Chapter 1. The Crime That Should Not Exist, London. October 1936. A cold rain hissed against the great glass dome of the British Museum reading room long after the last scholar had gone home. The night porter, Mr. Josiah Flint, was making his 2 o'clock round, with his usual grumble about drafts and ghosts, when he noticed the side door to the manuscript salon standing ajar. That door was secured by 3 separate locks and a Chubb alarm that rang directly to Scotland Yard. Yet there it was, open, silent, inviting. Inside the salon, or under a single green banker's lamp, the famous Kangxi map of forbidden truths lay in its bulletproof case exactly as it had for the last 6 months, except the glass was cut in a perfect circle and the 300-year-old silk map was gone. On the mahogany table beneath the empty case, someone had arranged 4 objects in a neat row: a jade scalpel with a dragon handle, a single white camellia, a train ticket from Paris to Dover dated yesterday, and a calling card. The card was thick cream stock in the center. Embossed in emerald ink were the unmistakable initials, H.P. At precisely 6:45 a.m. Hercule Poirot stepped out of a taxi in Great Russell Street, turned up the collar of his enormous overcoat, and regarded the museum steps with extreme displeasure. Chief Inspector Japp was waiting under the portico, looking as though he had slept in his hat. "Morning, Poirot," Japp said grimly. "You're going to hate this one." Poirot's eyebrows performed their famous ascent. "My friend, I already hate the rain. Show me why I should hate more." They walked together through corridors still smelling of beeswax and old learning. Scholars and cleaners parted like the Red Sea before Poirot's gleaming patent shoes and perfectly centred type-in shaped like a tiny question mark in the manuscript. Salon. The scene waited exactly as the thief had left it. Poirot paused on the threshold, nostrils flaring as though scenting the air for lies. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "Arrogance." He moved first to the glass case, the circle cut from the bulletproof. Glass was so precise it could have been drawn with a compass. No scratches, no hesitation marks. Poirot produced his little pocket lens and studied the edge. "Cut from the inside," he announced. "Observe how the bevel leans inward." Someone was already inside the case when the glass was cut. "Impossible, you say?" "Naturally," Japp snorted. The alarm never sounded. The locks were untouched. The night porter swears nobody came in or out after closing. Poirot turned to the 4 objects on the table. He lifted the jade scalpel delicately. Between gloved fingers, Chinese, late Ming, ceremonial, not surgical, perfectly capable of removing a man's life. And see here on the camellia petal, 1 spot of fresh blood. He bent over the train ticket. 3rd class, Calais to Dover. Punched yesterday afternoon. Our thief enjoys irony. Finally, the card. Poirot held it to the light, lips pursed. In a soundless whistle, "H.P.," Japp growled. "Either someone wants us to think it was you, or Poirot finished softly. "Someone wishes Hercule Poirot to understand that this crime was committed for his benefit alone. A challenge, my dear Japp. A gauntlet thrown at the feet of the greatest detective in Europe." At that moment, a young constable burst in, white-faced. "Sir, the body, it's Mr. Flint." In the reading room, throat cut ear to ear. And there's something carved on his forehead. Jap swore. Poirot merely closed his eyes for 3 seconds, then opened them brighter than ever. Take me. They found Josiah Flint slumped over a central table. Tea, his lantern still warm beside him. The wound was clean, almost merciful, but on the dead man's forehead, carved with the same jade scalpel, was a tiny, perfect symbol. A circle bisected by an arrow pointing east. Poirot stared at it for a long time. The map of forbidden truths, he said at last, voice low. It is said to show every secret route used by emperors and smugglers from Beijing to the Mediterranean. Routes that powerful men have killed to keep hidden for centuries. Jap wiped his brow. So someone stole it to sell. No, my friend. Someone stole it to make certain that Hercule Poirot follows. The blood arrow, the camellia, the card with my initials, this is an invitation. He turned on his heel, coat swirling like a matador's cape. Come, Jap, we have a train to catch. The Dover-Calais boat leaves in 4 hours, and I have the feeling our murderer is impatient for company. As they strode away, Poirot glanced once more at the empty case and the neat row of objects. Tell me, Jap, he said, almost cheerfully. Have you ever seen a crime announce itself so politely? It is almost flattering. Behind them, in the silence of the manuscript salon, the green banker's lamp flickered once, as though someone invisible had just blown it a kiss. Chapter 2. The Woman Who Traveled with Camellias. The boat train to Dover rattled through the wet Kent countryside like an impatient beast. Hercule Poirot sat alone in a first-class compartment, legs crossed, gloved hands folded over the head of his Malacca cane, eyes half closed but seeing everything. Across from him, Chief Inspector Jap pretended to read the morning paper while actually watching. Poirot watched the rain streak the windows. At Dover, the fog lay thick on the harbor, turning the gulls into white ghosts. Poirot insisted they board the cross-channel steamer 20 minutes early. He wanted, he said, to observe the passengers before they observed him. On the upper deck, wrapped in sables against the wind, stood a woman who made every head turn. Tall, raven-haired, skin like porcelain, wearing a black coat with a single white camellia pinned at the throat. She smoked a cigarette in a long jade holder that exactly matched the stolen scalpel. Jap whistled. Under his breath, "That's Countess Vera Rossakoff." Poirot's mustache gave the tiniest twitch of pleasure. The same. The only woman who ever succeeded in robbing Hercule Poirot, then returned the jewels with a kiss. I have not seen her since Moscow in 1924. The Countess turned as though she had felt the weight of his gaze. Her famous emerald eyes widened, then narrowed in delight. She crossed the deck with the grace of a panther and dropped into a mock curtsy. Monsieur Poirot, the English Channel suddenly becomes charming. Countess Poirot bowed over her gloved hand. You grow more dangerous with the years. And you still favor camellias. She touched the flower at her throat. A sentimental weakness. They remind me of blood on snow. You received my little invitation. Jap choked. Poirot silenced him with a look. Your invitation, Poirot, said softly, was written in a night porter's blood. A trifle dramatic, even for you. The Countess laughed, low and rich. Not my blood, Sherry. Merely my calling card. Yes. The map was stolen by someone who wishes us both to dance. I am only the messenger. She opened her black leather handbag and drew out an envelope sealed with green wax. Inside was a single sheet of rice paper on which someone had drawn, in exquisite brushwork, the same symbol carved on the porter's forehead, circle bisected by an arrow pointing east. Beneath it, in spidery European handwriting, Constantinople, Topkapi Palace. Midnight, October 29th. Come alone, or the next death will be yours. The Countess watched Poirot read. "The thief knows you will not resist," she said. "He also knows I would deliver this in person because only I could make you believe it is genuine." Poirot folded the note with deliberate care. "And the jade scalpel," he asked, "left for you as a souvenir. The true murderer prefers a different blade." She glanced at Jap. "Your English bulldog will try to arrest me now. Shall I make a scene?" Jap's hand was already moving toward his handcuffs. Poirot lifted one finger. "No, mon ami. The Countess is, how do you say, a red herring with very expensive perfume. She did not kill the porter. How can you possibly?" Poirot tapped the camellia. "Observe, the flower is fresh. It has been in cold water." Yet the blood spot on the petal in the museum was already brown. Two different camellias, therefore two different hands. The Countess rewarded him with a slow clap. "Always the little gray cells. I told our mysterious friend you would see through the theater." The steamer's horns sounded. A Calais drew. Nearer through the fog, Countess Rossakoff leaned close enough for Poirot to smell her perfumed jasmine and danger. "The man you seek calls himself the cartographer," she whispered. "He believes the Kangxi map leads to a treasure greater than gold. He will kill anyone who tries to stop him reaching Constantinople, including you." She pressed something small and hard into Poirot's palm, a tiny jade dragon no longer than a matchstick. "A gift," she said, "from the scalpel's original owner. You will need friends in the East, mon petit, and debts are useful currency." Then she was gone, melting into the crowd of passengers descending to the gangway as though she had never existed. Jap stared after her, mouth open. Poirot closed his fist around the jade dragon. "Come, my friend," he said briskly. "We have a train to catch. The Orient Express leaves Paris tonight, and Hercule Poirot does not disappoint when he is invited to a murder." As they walked down the gangplank, Poirot glanced once at the jade dragon in his hand. Its eyes were tiny rubies that caught the weak sunlight like drops of fresh blood. Somewhere ahead, across half of Europe, a man who signed his work with arrows waited beneath the domes of Constantinople, and Hercule Poirot, for the first time in many years, felt the delicious prickle of real fear along his spine. Chapter 3. The Orient Express at midnight. The Simplon Orient Express pulled out of the Gare de Lyon at exactly 23:47. Sliding through the wet Paris night like a jeweled serpent, Hercule Poirot stood on the platform a full 10 minutes before departure, watching every passenger who boarded the Istanbul coach. His small suitcase, monogrammed, naturally contained 3 perfectly pressed suits, a box of his favorite tisane, and the jade dragon that now never left his waistcoat pocket. He had reserved Compartment 7 in Wagenlitz 3329. Next door. Compartment 8 had been booked at the last moment by a certain Monsieur Henry Paul, antiquarian of Brussels. Poirot smiled when he saw the name on the passenger list, Henry Paul. Indeedhp again. The train gathered speed through the sleeping suburbs. Poirot sat in the dining car beneath the Lalique glass panels, sipping a single glass of tisane, while the steward locked away the silver for the night. At 0:12 precisely, a woman entered alone. She was perhaps 35, dressed in severe black velvet with a single white camellia at the waist, the third camellia in 3 days. Her face was pale, beautiful in the way of Byzantine icons, and her left hand never left the small beaded reticule on her lap. She took the table opposite Poirot and ordered nothing. Instead, she stared at him for a full minute, then spoke in perfect French with a faint Eastern accent. "You are expected in Constantinople, Monsieur Poirot, but some of us hope you will not arrive." Poirot inclined his head. "And you, mademoiselle, are expected to prevent me." She opened the reticule and placed on the tablecloth a photograph, an old sepia portrait of a Chinese mandarin in imperial yellow robes. the Kangxi Emperor himself, holding the very map that had vanished from the British Museum. On the back, someone had written in red ink, "The Emperor's secrets die with those who seek them." The woman rose as she passed Poirot's table. She let fall a second object, a tiny ivory puzzle box no larger than a walnut. "Midnight tomorrow," she whispered. "Solve it before Lausanne, or the man in compartment 8 will open your throat the way the porter's was opened." Then she was gone, the camellia left behind like a calling card. Poirot waited until the corridor was empty, then picked up the puzzle box. It was carved with dragons and clouds, ancient, exquisite, and locked by 7 hidden slides. He turned it gently in his fingers, hearing something shift inside, something that rattled like a single dried seed. At 0:47, the train plunged into the tunnel outside Vallorbe. For exactly 2 minutes, the carriage lights failed when they flickered back. The camellia on Poirot's table had been replaced by a different flower, a black tulip. Poirot did not touch it. Black tulips did not exist in nature. They were created by forcing white ones in darkness, and were the traditional emblem of a certain secret society of assassins that had vanished from Europe in 1918, or so everyone believed. Back in his compartment, Poirot drew the blinds, turned the key, and sat beneath the weak blue nightlight. He worked on the ivory puzzle box with the patience of a man defusing a bomb. Click, slide, turn. At 1:23, the final panel opened. Inside lay a single human tooth upper left incisor and a scrap of rice paper. On the paper, in the same spidery hand as the top copy note, the owner of this tooth begged to keep the Emperor's secret. "He will beg again in Lausanne. Ask him why the map must never reach Constantinople." Poirot wrapped the tooth in his handkerchief and placed it in his pocket beside the jade dragon. He did not sleep. Instead, he sat very still, eyes closed, letting the little gray cells dance. At 5:10, the train slowed for the Swiss border. The corridor outside was silent except for the soft creak of the carriage. Then came 3 gentle taps. On Poirot's door, tap, tap, tap. Poirot did not move. A voice, cultured, amused, with the faintest trace of Belgium beneath the French. "Monsieur Poirot, may an admirer pay his respects?" The door handle turned slowly. It was locked, of course. A soft laugh, still cautious. "Excellent. We will speak in Lausanne then. Bring the tooth." The cartographer grows impatient. Footsteps receded. Poirot waited another full minute before opening the door a crack. The corridor was empty. But pinned to the brass number 7 with a thin steel needle was a 4th camellia. This one stained dark red at the heart. Poirot removed it carefully. Between the petals lay a single drop of fresh blood. Still warm, he looked toward compartment 8. The door was closed, but beneath it showed a thin line of light, and from inside came the faint sound of someone humming an old Walloon lullaby Poirot had not heard since childhood. The train roared on toward Lausanne through the cold alpine dawn, carrying its passengers and its secrets deeper into the east. And Hercule Poirot, for the first time in his long career, felt the chill of knowing that the man in the next compartment might, after all, be his equal, or worse, his mirror. Chapter 4. The man who sold silence. The Simplon Orient Express eased into Lausanne station at 8:42. Under a sky the color of wet steel, snow lay thick on the platform roofs, and every breath hung in the air like a small white ghost. Hercule Poirot stepped down from the wagonlet with the neat precision of a man who disliked slush on his patent shoes. He carried only his Malacca cane and a small leather document case that now contained 1 jade dragon, 1 human tooth, 1 ivory puzzle box, and 4 camellias of increasing darkness. Chief Inspector Japp had been forced to remain in Paris' official channels. Red tape, the usual nonsense. So Poirot traveled alone, which suited him perfectly. Solitary wolf is harder to track. On the platform, a thin man in a camel hair coat waited beside a sleek black Daimler. He had the hollow cheeks of an academic and the terrified eyes of a rabbit. When he saw Poirot, actually flinched. "Monsieur Poirot." His voice cracked like a schoolboy's. "Professor Armand Duval, British Museum. They sent me. Please, the car." Inside the Daimler, the heating was turned high, yet Duval still shivered. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror as though expecting pursuit. "They took my tongue, you know," he said suddenly. Poirot's eyebrows rose a millimeter. "Your tongue, monsieur?" Duval opened his mouth. Where his tongue should have been was only a dark, healing scar. He closed it again, quickly, ashamed. 2 nights ago, in my hotel in Geneva, I woke with a hand over my mouth and the smell of ether. When I came to, it was gone, and this was sewn into my pillow. He handed Poirot a square of rice paper. On it, in the familiar spidery hand, "Silence is golden. Speak." Of the Conchi map again, and we take the rest. Poirot studied the stitches, small, neat, professional. "A surgeon's work," he murmured, "or a torturer who trained as one." Duval's hands shook so badly he could barely light a cigarette. I catalogued the map for the exhibition. I noticed something. Discrepancies. Hidden watermarks that only show under ultraviolet light. Routes that end at places no European was meant to find. I told no one, I swear. Yet someone knew, Poirot said gently. "Tell me about the man who calls himself the cartographer." Duval's eyes darted to the driver, then to the fogged windows. "He came to the museum 6 months ago, tall, European, but with high cheekbones, Tartar blood, perhaps. One eye blue, one eye green. Different colors. He called himself Monsieur Henri Paul. Said he was writing a book on Ming cartography. He asked questions no ordinary scholar would ask. About the forbidden routes, about the emperor's private seal that appears only once on the entire map. And you answered, 'I thought he was harmless.'" Duval's voice rose to a squeak. "Then last week he invited me to dinner at the Savoy. Showed me a photograph of my daughter at her school in Dorset. She is 8 years old. He said, if I ever spoke of the hidden routes, the next package would contain her tongue." The Daimler turned into a narrow street of shuttered shops. Snow began to fall more heavily. Poirot tapped his cane thoughtfully. "And the tooth I carry." Duval went the color of old parchment. That belonged to Sir Godfrey Harrington, chairman of the exhibition committee. He laughed at the threats. Said the map would go on display whatever anyone did. They found him yesterday morning in the Thames, mouth sewn shut with gold wire. The tooth was missing. The car stopped outside a small, discreet hotel with lace curtains and a brass plate. "Hotel du Lac." Duval leaned closer, voice barely a whisper. "He is on the train, Monsieur Poirot, the cartographer. I felt him watching me board at Paris. He knows I am meeting you. When we reach Constantinople, he will kill us both unless you stop him." Poirot patted the professor's knee with surprising kindness. "Courage, mon ami. Hercule Poirot has never yet failed when a child's safety is at stake." They entered the hotel. The lobby was empty except for a sleepy concierge and the smell of coffee. Duval asked for messages. There was one, a plain envelope addressed in green ink. Inside, a single black tulip petal and a train ticket. Istanbul to Tbilisi, departing November 1st. On the back, the spidery writing. "Change of plan. The girl will lose more than her tongue if you reach the Golden Horn. Disembark at Milan.com. Loan to the Duomo at Complin. Bring the little Belgian Duval began to cry without sound. Poirot took the ticket, turned it over, and smiled the small, dangerous smile that had ended more than one criminal career. "Milan," he said softly. "Excellent. The Duomo has many shadows, but it also has many exits. And Hercule Poirot is about to become the bait in his own trap." He tucked the black tulip petal into his waistcoat pocket beside the jade dragon and the tooth. "Professor, we'll take the next train back to Geneva and place yourself under the protection of the Swiss police. Tell them everything. Then write to your daughter that Papa has been called suddenly to Rome on urgent business. She must not worry." Duval clutched Poirot's sleeve. "And you?" Poirot's eyes glittered like winter stars. "I, my friend, am going to Milan to attend evening prayer with a man who believes he is invisible. We shall see who kneels first." As the Daimler pulled away through the thickening snow, Poirot stood alone on the hotel steps and looked up at the leaden Swiss sky. Somewhere on the Orient Express, in compartment 8, a man with one blue eye and one green eye was sharpening a blade and humming that same Walloon lullaby, and for the first time since Dover. Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied chuckle. The game, as they say, was truly afoot. Chapter 5. Vespers in the Duomo. Milan, the 29th of October, 1936, 6:17. P.M. The great doors of the Duomo had justly closed behind the last tourists, and the cathedral settled into its evening hush. Only a few candles still burned in side chapels, throwing long trembling shadows across 500 years of marble. Hercule Poirot walked alone down the central aisle, his footsteps echoing like slow heartbeats. He wore a black overcoat and a soft black hat, looking for all the world like a pious bourgeois come to pray, except that his eyes never left the darkness above the triforium. He had arrived 3 hours early, 3 hours to study every confessional, every spiral stair, every patch of shadow where a man with two colored eyes might wait. He had found nothing. That, in itself, was interesting. At 6:45, the bells began to comprehend. A dozen white-robed Dominican novices filed in, their sandals whispering over the floor. Poirot slipped into a side pew near the tomb of St. Charles Borromeo and waited. At exactly 7 o'clock, the west door creaked again. A tall figure entered against the last of the daylight. A man in a long charcoal coat, face hidden by a broad-brimmed hat. He walked with the faintest limp right leg, old injury, and carried a slim ebony cane. Poirot's pulse quickened. The man paused beneath the great rose window, looked once toward the high altar, then turned and walked straight to Poirot's pew. He sat, the brim of the hat lifted. One eye was winter blue, the other leaf green. The face between them was lean, aristocratic, scarred along the left cheekbone by something that had once been very sharp. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, in flawless French, touched with a trace of the Caucasus, "I am the cartographer. You kept your appointment. I am almost flattered." Poirot inclined his head. One does not ignore an invitation written in human blood. The cartographer smiled. It was not pleasant. Blood is merely ink for those who understand history. The Kangxi map is written in the same language. He reached inside his coat and drew out a roll of yellow silk no longer than a man's forearm. Even in the candlelight, Poirot recognized the imperial dragons at each corner. "You brought it here." Poirot kept his voice level. "Into a cathedral." "God." "And I have an arrangement," the man said. "He looks the other way when old debts are settled." He unrolled the map just enough to reveal a portion. Mountains in ink and gold, rivers like silver threads, and in the lower corner a tiny crimson sealed the private, vermilion thumbprint of the Kangxi emperor himself. Poirot's breath caught. He Had seen photographs, of course, but never the living silk. It glowed. Beautiful, is it not? The cartographer murmured. It shows the path taken by the emperor's secret caravan in 1719. Jade, gold, and something far more precious. The bones of a woman who could destroy 3 empires if her tomb were ever found. He rolled the map again with reverent care. 300 years ago, my family guarded that tomb. Your British Museum stole the map. I merely reclaimed family property. Poirot's eyes never left the man's face, and the porter. Professor Duval's tongue. Sir Godfrey's tooth. These also were family property. The cartographer shrugged. Warnings. People are careless with warnings until the price becomes personal. From the choir, the novices began the first psalm, voices rising pure and cold into the vault. The cartographer leaned closer. Here is my final warning, little Belgian. Leave the train at Venice tomorrow night. Take the next boat to England. Forget the map. In return, your name will never appear on my list again. Poirot allowed himself a small, frosty smile. And? If I refuse, the man's 2-colored eyes glittered. Then in Constantinople, you will join the others who tried to keep the emperor's secret. I have prepared a special death for you. Slow, elegant, and perfectly silent. He reached into his pocket and laid something on the pew between them. A tiny ivory earplug carved into the shape of a screaming face. For when the screaming begins, he explained gently. Poirot did not touch it. You have made one mistake. Monsieur, only one. You believe Hercule Poirot is afraid of death? Poirot's voice was soft, almost kind. I am not. I am afraid of disorder. And you, my friend, have created a great deal of disorder. The cartographer rose. Then we understand each other. He turned to leave. As he did, the candlelight caught the silver head of his ebony cane. It was carved into the exact same symbol that had been cut into the porter's forehead, arrow piercing a circle. Poirot called after him, very quietly. Tell me one thing. The lullaby on the train, the Walloon lullaby. The man paused at the end of the pew. For the first time, something almost human crossed his face. Because, Monsieur Poirot, my mother was from Liege. She sang it to me when I was small, before the Cossacks burned our village and sold me to the Ottomans. Some melodies stay in the blood. Then he was gone, melting into the forest of pillars as though the cathedral itself had swallowed him. Poirot remained seated until Compline ended, and the last novice had left. Only then did he pick up the ivory earplug. He turned it in his fingers, examining the screaming face, and slipped it into the same pocket as the jade dragon, the tooth, and the black tulip petal. Outside, the Milan night was cold and starless. Poirot stood on the cathedral steps and looked up at the Madonna, glowing gold against the dark. Very well, mon cartographer, he said to the empty air. Let us see whose mother taught him the better lesson. Far above, one of the gargoyles seemed to shift in the wind, but it was only a trick of the candlelight, flickering through the rose window, or perhaps not. Chapter 6. The Violin That Played in Blood. Venice, the 30th of October, 1936, 22:11. The Simplon Orient Express waited at Santa Lucia station like a dark jewel on black velvet, steam curling around its brass lamps. Hercule Poirot boarded alone, his small valise heavier by one ivory earplug and one dangerous certainty. The cartographer was already on the train. And tonight, someone would die. He had spent the day walking the narrow calle of Venice, visiting 3 churches and 4 antiquarian booksellers, asking apparently idle questions about Ming silk and imperial seals. Every bookseller had gone pale at the mention of the Kangxi map. One had even crossed himself and refused to speak at all. Now in the corridor of the sleeping car, Poirot paused. Outside compartment 8, the The brass number gleamed. No light showed beneath the door. He listened. Nothing then, very faintly. The sound of a violin, 3 notes of that same Walloon lullaby. Played so softly they might have been memory rather than music. Poirot continued to his own compartment. He had barely closed the door when the communicating door to the next carriage slid open and a girl stepped through. She was perhaps 22, with the pale gold hair and frightened eyes of a Murano glass figurine. She wore a dark green traveling dress and carried a violin case as though it were a child, Monsieur Poirot. Her English was perfect, with only the faintest Slavic lilt. "My name is Katya Volkov. I was told you protect people." Poirot studied her. "And who told you this, mademoiselle?" "The Countess Rozakov. In Paris. She said if I reached you before Constantinople, you would keep me alive." She opened the violin case. Inside lay no violin, Li the Kangxi map, rolled tightly around a slim ebony baton, its silk glowing like moonlit water. Poirot's breath stopped. He had last seen the map in the cartographer's hands in Milan Cathedral less than 24 hours ago. Katya's hands trembled. "He gave it to me this afternoon in San Marco. Said I must deliver it to you personally on the train tonight. Said if I failed, my brother in Leningrad would lose more than his tongue." She unrolled the map a hand's breadth, where yesterday there had been only mountains and rivers. New lines had appeared, delicate crimson threads that had not been there before, forming a perfect arrow pointing southeast, straight toward a tiny island in the Aegean marked with a single Chinese character. "The ink," Katya whispered. "It changes. Every night a new path appears. He says the map is alive, that it is leading him to the tomb." Poirot took the map with reverent fingers. The silk was warm, possibly warm, as though it had lain in sunlight. He noticed something else. At the very center where the emperor's private seal had been, the vermilion thumbprint was now smeared, as if a real thumb had pressed there while the ink was still wet, and beneath the smear, in fresh blood, someone had written 2 words in French: "Your move." Katya began to cry silently. "He is in the next carriage. I saw him, the man with 2 colored eyes. He smiled at me as though he knew I would come to you." Poirot rolled the map again, slid it into the inner pocket of his overcoat, and buttoned the pocket with deliberate care. "Listen to me, little one," he said gently. "You will lock yourself in this compartment. You will open the door to no one but me. I will knock 3 times. Thus," he demonstrated. "Tap, tap. Anyone else, you scream. The conductor is my friend." He took from his case a small pearl-handled revolver and laid it on the table. Katya stared at it as though it were a snake. Poirot smiled. "Better a snake you know than one you do not." He stepped into the corridor and closed the door softly behind him. The train lurched, gathered speed, and plunged into the darkness beyond Venice, heading across the causeway toward Trieste and the unknown east. At 23:59 Poirot stood outside compartment 8 again. This time the light was on. He could hear the violin clearly, now slow, mocking, playing the lullaby in a minor key that turned childhood into nightmare. Poirot raised his cane and knocked once. The music stopped instantly. The door opened 6 inches. The cartographer stood there in shirt sleeves, the violin tucked beneath, his chin like a rifle. "You brought me my map," he said. It was not a question. "I brought you something better," Poirot replied. An ending. The cartographer's 2-colored eyes narrowed. "You are either very brave or very stupid." "Both," Poirot admitted cheerfully, "but mostly very curious. Tell me, Monsieur, when did you discover that the map drinks blood?" For the first time the cartographer looked surprised. Poirot continued softly, "Every death feeds it. The porter, Sir Godfrey. The others we have not yet found." Each time a new path appears. You are not leading the map to the tomb. The map is leading you. And when it has drunk enough, it will not need you any longer. The cartographer's hand moved toward his pocket. Poirot's cane was faster. The ferrule pressed hard beneath the man's chin. "Careful," Poirot murmured. "The corridor is narrow, and I have excellent balance." Behind them, from Katja's compartment, came 3 frantic knocks, dash tap, dash tap, dash tap. Then a scream. The cartographer smiled. Too late, little Belgian. He shoved Poirot backward and ran. Poirot followed, cane in one hand, revolver in the other, as the train roared into the night, carrying its cargo of silk and blood and centuries-old hunger toward whatever waited beyond the dawn. Chapter 7. The name written in fresh crimson dawned over the Yugoslav frontier. The 31st of October, 1936. The Simplon Orient Express slowed for the border guards. Wheels screeching on frosted rails. A thin, bloody light crept across the snow-covered plains and slipped through the blinds of compartment 7. Hercule Poirot stood in the doorway, revolver lowered, staring at what had been Katja Volkov. She sat upright on the banquette, eyes wide and peaceful. As though asleep, a single white camellia rested in her lap. Her throat had been opened with one clean stroke, so clean that only now, as the train lurched, did the blood begin to well and run. On the small fold-down table, the Kangxi map lay unrolled. The crimson threads had spread overnight like frost flowers, weaving a new path that ended at a tiny island in the Aegean at the very center. Where the emperor's seal had been, fresh vermilion ink now formed elegant European letters. Hercule Poirot, Constantinople, -1 November, Istanbul Station, midnight. His name was still wet. It glistened like a fresh wound. Poirot's hand did not shake as he touched the edge of the silk. The map was hot, fever-hot, and seemed almost to pulse. Beneath his fingers, he rolled it with the reverence of a priest closing a reliquary and placed it inside his overcoat, directly over his heart. The conductor, Monsieur Book, an old acquaintance from many journeys, arrived pale and stammering. He had heard nothing, seen nothing. The corridor had been empty all night. Poirot closed Katja's eyes with 2 gentle fingers. "She heard something," he said quietly. She opened the door to someone she trusted, someone who knew the lullaby. Book swallowed. The young lady had no enemies. "Everyone on this train now has the same enemy," Poirot replied. "Piece of silk that has waited 200 years to finish its journey." He stepped into the corridor. Compartment 8 stood open. It was empty. The bed had not been slept in. On the pillow lay a single black tulip and a note in the cartographer's spidery hand. The girl was merely the inkwell. "Your blood will be the signature. Enjoy the scenery." Poirot folded the note, placed it with the map, and walked the length of the train while the border guard stamped passports and tried not to look at the Belgian with a face of cold stone. In the dining car, he found the only other passenger who mattered. She sat alone at a window table, drinking coffee as though the world had not tilted on its axis. Countess Vera Rosikoff wore mourning black and a single white camellia. Her eyes were red, but her smile was pure steel. "You are late, Sherry," she greeted him. "I ordered you tisane. It grows cold." Poirot sat opposite her. "You knew Katja Volkov would die." "I knew someone would die," the Countess corrected. "The map always drinks before the final night. I tried to reach her first. I failed." She pushed a small velvet pouch across the table. Inside lay a silver whistle on a silk cord. "Old Russian cavalry signal," she said. "One blast brings every white Russian porter on this train running old debts. You understand? Keep it. You will need friends before Constantinople." Poirot weighed the whistle in his palm. "And you, madame, why do you risk your beautiful neck?" The Countess touched the camellia at her throat. "Because the tomb the map seeks contains my great-grandmother's bones. She was the Kangxi Emperor's last European concubine. The cartographer is my half-cousin. He wishes to open the tomb and sell the secret of her bloodline to the highest bidder Japanese. Germans, Soviets, whoever pays most for a claim to the dragon throne. I prefer family scandals to stay buried." She leaned closer. "He will try again tonight. The map needs one more death to complete the path. Yours." Poirot sipped the cold tisane and surprised her with a small, fierce smile. Then let him try. Hercule Poirot has prepared a small surprise of his own. Outside the window, the mountains of Slovenia slid past in silence, white and indifferent. Inside the dining car, the silver coffee pots trembled gently with the rhythm of the train, and the Kangxi map, pressed against Poirot's heart, grew warmer with every mile. One day remained. One night, one final name written in blood that had not yet been spilled. Chapter 8. The Cistern of Whispering Columns. Constantinople. The 1st of November 1936, 1903. The Simplon Orient Express steamed into Hyderpaka station on the Asian shore exactly on time. Its whistle echoing across the dark water of the Bosphorus like a dying swan. Hercule Poirot was the last passenger to descend. He wore a black astrakhan coat and carried only the Malacca cane and a small calfskin dispatch case that now weighed far more than leather and paper should. Across the water, the lights of Stamboul flickered gold and crimson against the evening sky. Somewhere among those minarets and domes waited the cartographer, the map's final destination, and the tomb that had swallowed lives for 2 centuries. Poirot took the ferry to the European side alone. The wind off the Black Sea was sharp, enough to cut flesh. He stood at the rail and watched the city draw nearer, feeling the map pulse against his chest like a second heart. At Galata Bridge, he hired a horse cab and gave an address. Few tourists ever spoke. The entrance to the Yerebatin Sarnik, the Basilica Cistern. The driver crossed himself but took the money. The cistern lay 6 centuries deep beneath the city. A forest of marble columns rising from black water, lit only by a few oil lamps that turned every ripple into liquid fire. Poirot paid the guardian generously to lock the iron gate behind him and disappear until dawn. He was early. Midnight was still 5 hours away. With calm precision, he walked the wooden walkway that threaded between the columns until he reached the very center, where 2 great Medusa heads stared upside down into the water, their stone eyes blind with centuries of tears. There he opened the dispatch case. Inside lay the Kangxi map, now almost too hot to touch, and a small tin of crimson ink he had purchased that afternoon in the Egyptian bazaar. Poirot unrolled the silk across a flat stone and studied the final path that had appeared at dawn, a perfect arrow pointing beneath Constantinople itself, ending at a tiny imperial seal directly beneath the spot where he now stood. He dipped a fine camel hair brush into the crimson ink and, with the neatness that characterized everything he did, wrote 3 words in elegant French across the center of the map. "I sigh, mon cousin." Here, my cousin. Then he weighted the corners with 4 small stones, placed the silver whistle on top, and stepped back into the shadows, behind a column carved with peacock eyes. He did not have long to wait. At 23:17, the iron gate creaked. Soft footsteps crossed the walkway. A lantern appeared, held high by a tall figure in a charcoal coat. The cartographer, he moved without hurry, the light catching first the blue eye, then the green, until he stood over the map. He read Poirot's message and laughed once short, almost admiring. "Very theatrical, little Belgian. You always did love an audience." From the darkness, Poirot answered, voice calm, "Tonight the audience is stone, and stone remembers everything. The cartographer set the lantern down. In his right hand gleamed a curved Ottoman dagger with a jade hilt twin to the scalpel left. In London, you brought it to the appointed place, he said. I should almost thank you. He knelt and touched the fresh ink with one finger. It came away wet. Still warm, he murmured. The map accepts the offering. He began to roll the silk, crooning the Walloon lullaby under his breath. Poirot stepped forward into the circle of light. The map accepts nothing tonight, he said. Because tonight, mon cousin, it drinks ink, not blood. The cartographer's head snapped up. Poirot held up the small tin. Cochineal and gum Arabic, bought this afternoon. Harmless. The map has tasted only pigment since Venice. It is starving. The first time the man with two colored eyes looked uncertain. Poirot continued softly. You believed the legend that the Kangxi emperor cursed the silk with the blood of 100 monks so it would guide only his true heir. A pretty story. But legends are like pastry. They rise beautifully until someone opens the oven door. He took another step. The map is merely silk and ink. The paths that appeared were drawn by you each night with a sympathetic solution heat from your body, or a small lamp revealed them. Very clever. But the final path, the one that was to end beneath this cistern, was never completed. Because I have been adding my own chemicals each morning. A fixative, your invisible ink is now quite visible and quite permanent. He pointed to the stones weighting the corners. Under the lantern's glow, faint crimson lines could be seen spreading outward from Poirot's message lines that formed not an arrow, but a perfect circle enclosing both men. The cartographer's face twisted. You think a trick stops destiny. No, Poirot said, but it stops you. He raised the silver whistle to his lips and blew one sharp, piercing blast. From every archway and shadow, figures emerged, white Russian porters. From the train, armed with the heavy brass fire extinguishers they carried on duty. The ferry captain who owed Countess Rozikoff a favor from 1920. Even the cistern guardian, clutching an ancient Ottoman musket. The cartographer looked once at the ring of hostile faces, once at the useless map, and for the first time the dagger trembled in his hand. Poirot spoke almost gently. Your mother sang you to sleep with a Walloon lullaby, and you sold your soul for a fairy tale about imperial blood. Drop the knife, monsieur. The game is finished. The dagger clattered on the stone. Above them, far away, the great bells of Hagia Sophia began to ring midnight, slow and mournful across the sleeping city. In the cistern, the sound came down through centuries of water and stone, wrapping the two men, one small and triumphant, one tall and suddenly broken, in the same ancient echo. Chapter 9. T on the BOSPHORUS. Dawn. The 2nd of November, 1936. The first pale light slid across the water of the Golden Horn like watered silk, from the terrace of a small wooden yali on the Asian shore. Hercule Poirot and Countess Vera Rozikoff watched the city wake. Gulls wheeled overhead. The call to prayer drifted from 100 minarets, thin and haunting. A brass samovar steamed between them, and the air smelled of apple tea, salt, and the faint sweetness of late roses. The cartographer, whose real name had turned out to be Prince Mikhail Ivanovich Obolensky-Rosakov, last of a disgraced line, was at that moment in the custody of the Turkish secret police, bound for a quiet prison on the Black Sea coast where inconvenient aristocrats sometimes disappeared forever. The Kangxi map lay rolled on the table between Poirot and the Countess. It's now merely a beautiful antique, its murderous tricks exposed and neutralized. The Countess poured tea with the same grace she had once used to pour champagne in the casinos of pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg. You saved my family's honor, Hercule, she said softly, and you saved my cousin's soul, what little he had left. Poirot accepted the glass and its silver zarf. He will live. That is sometimes a heavier punishment than death. She looked at him over the rim of her cup, emerald eyes suddenly. Serious, you still do not understand the whole truth, do you? Poirot's mustache gave a small, dignified quiver. Explain, madame. The Countess unrolled the map one last time. In the gentle morning light, the crimson lines Poirot had fixed with his chemical were clearly visible. They formed no imperial route at all, but an intricate steeped perfect rose. My great-grandmother, she said, was never the Kangxi Emperor's concubine. She was his cartographer. A Frenchwoman named Rose de Rochefoucauld, kidnapped by Jesuit missionaries in 1708 and carried to Beijing as a gift. The emperor fell in love with her mind. She drew him this map not of treasure routes, but of every safe house, every hidden monastery, every secret path that the Catholic underground used to smuggle priests and Bibles into China. She traced the rose with one crimson nail. When the emperor discovered the truth, he did not execute her. He loved her. Instead, he ordered the map cursed in the eyes of the court, a story of blood and ghosts, so that no Mandarin would ever dare follow its paths again. Rose escaped back to Europe in 1722, carrying the only copy. She married my great-grandfather in Venice and hid the map inside a camellia bush in our garden. Every woman in my family has worn a white camellia ever since for Rose, who painted the map with cochineal and rose-petal juice. Poirot sat very still, letting the revelation settle like dust. So all the deaths, he said at last, were for a map of mercy. And for a lie my cousin needed to believe, the Countess finished. He wanted so badly to be imperial that he was murdered for a fairy tale. She rolled the silk again and tied it with a ribbon, the color of dried blood. I am giving it to the Vatican, she said. They will keep Rose's secret safe, and perhaps one day her paths will save lives again. Poirot sipped his tea. And you, madame, what will you do now? The Countess laughed her old, rich, dangerous laugh. I have a small villa in Beirut, and a great deal of jewelry that needs wearing. Life is for the living, Sherry. She leaned forward and kissed him once, lightly, on the corner of his mustache. Thank you for giving me back my family's true story, she whispered. You are the only man I ever robbed who returned the favor 1,000-fold. Toro raised her hand to his lips with old-fashioned courtesy. Madame, it has been, as always, an education. They sat in silence while the sun climbed higher and the Bosphorus turned from pewter to molten gold far away. A fairy horn sounded, carrying travelers toward new horizons. The Kangxi map, no longer forbidden, no longer thirsty, lay quietly between them, finally at peace. Chapter 10. The Christmas Card from Beirut. White Lodge, Hertfordshire, the 24th of December, 1937. Snow fell softly past the windows of Poirot's neat little house, the one he had bought after retiring again from the chaos of London. The fire crackled. The Christmas tree, a modest affair, chosen for perfect symmetry, twinkled with exactly 36 glass ornaments. On the mantelpiece stood a single card. It was thick cream stock, edged in gold. On the front, embossed in emerald ink, were the initials H.P. Inside, in Countess Vera Rossakoff's sweeping hand. My dearest Hercule, a year ago you gave me back my family's honor and my cousin's life, though he still rots quietly in a Turkish prison and sends me whining letters I never answer. I promised you a final truth. Tonight, the promise is kept. The Kangxi map, or, as Rose de Rochefoucauld always called it, La Carte des Roses, is safe in the Vatican secret archives. But there was one last panel, a hidden fold sealed with imperial wax that even I did not know existed until the Holy Father himself broke it open last month. Inside was a letter addressed in French, dated 1721. From Rose to her unborn child, my great-grandmother. She wrote that the true treasure was never safe houses or secret paths. It was the recipe for the sympathetic ink she invented cochineal. Rose petals and a single drop of her own blood taken. On the night the emperor spared her life, with that ink she drew, in microscopic script along the very border of the map, the one secret the emperor truly feared, that Kangxi's favorite son, the prince who would become the Yongzheng emperor, was not his son at all, but the child of Rose de Rochefoucauld, conceived in love and hidden by an empire's greatest lie. The Vatican will never reveal it. The Manchu line ended long ago, but the blood of a French cartographer and a Chinese emperor still flows in my veins, and, it seems, in the veins of half the crowned heads of Europe who unknowingly descend from Jesuit missionaries and their converts. So you see, mon petit, the map never wanted death. It wanted the truth to stay gently buried until the world was kind enough to let it live. I have enclosed a gift. Wear it when you think of me. Joyeux Newell. Vera from the envelope slipped a tiny white camellia, pressed and perfect. Mounted on a gold pin shaped like a map rose, Poirot pinned it to the lapel of his dressing gown. Directly over his heart, he stood at the window and watched the snow cover. The quiet English garden covering every footprint, every trace of every journey. Then he raised his glass of tisane toward the darkness beyond the pane, where somewhere far across continents and sees a woman with emerald eyes was laughing at fate. Two secrets that die in peace, he murmured, and to the women brave enough to carry them. The fire settled, the clock struck 9. The snow kept falling, and Hercule Poirot retired, content, and secretly pleased, allowed himself the smallest, most satisfied smile of his long and extraordinary life. End of chapter 10. End of the story.